On today's show, Padres spring training, baby. We're giving you an update because we are, in fact, still in spring training mode. Talking about a bunch of the latest storylines, including Matt Waldron getting absolutely shelled, Martin Maldonado potentially making the team over Luis Campizano, some other guys looking good, looking at some opening day roster projections and whatnot, the race for the 5th spot, and a whole lot more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, March 11th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Feel free to reach out to me on there for any of your questions or comments. Love to get back to you, including on the mailbag show, which is every Monday. So make sure you send your questions and comments on the YouTube as well, and you'll have a chance to get answered every Monday, especially. Very cool stuff. Today's episode, guys, we are doing a spring training update. I also want to apologize for not referencing that yesterday was Mario Day. That's right. Type in right now, just type down if you don't get it, type MAR, and then type 10. It looks like Mario. It was Mario Day, and I forgot to mention that. The nerd that I am. But no, in all seriousness, guys, we're going to be talking about a bunch of the different latest reports that we've gotten from spring training. In my opinion, these are a little bit substantial. We still have plenty of time left, obviously, so these aren't like any sort of reports or, factoids that they might be irrelevant by the time we get to the end of this week, right? Like, that's just how spring training is moving. But we are getting a bunch of roster cuts. Let's start there. First one that happened, at least I should say first one that's happened since I last talked to you guys about the spring training update on March 6th. They made some moves. Left-handed pitchers Austin Krob, Ryan Och, and JB Wendelken. Right-handed pitchers Jose Espada, Brandon Nett, and Francis Pena. Catchers Brandon Valenzuela, Ethan Salas, and Anthony Villar. And infielders Leody DeVries and Romeo Sanabria were sent back. They were optioned. They were reassigned, whatever you want to call it. Nothing really surprising here. Frankly, Brandon Valenzuela was a guy that I talked about on this show as, is this guy, does he have anything? He's definitely got a little bit of defensive stuff, but it seems like his defensive ability is not nearly enough to warrant further inspection at this time, right? At this junction, to get a little bit more fancy. Unfortunately, I think that Valenzuela at one point was interesting as a guy that they could call up, but I think partially because of it was last year, I thought when I was talking about him more was because I just didn't know what was going to happen with Luis Campizano being sent down and all that. And it turns out they were like, we're just going Higgy Hive, basically. And that's what they did. And it was great. And it worked out just fine. So no surprise there. Ethan Salas and Leody DeVries, I guess some people might say, well, I'm a little surprised that they got caught already, that they got cut already. I'm not really. I think that they were just getting their feet wet. Remember, these are still extraordinarily young prospects. And like by the end of the year, I really could see them just rising in the prospect rankings. So we'll see. I talked about on my bold predictions episode, I could see a world in which the Padres get stupid and they elevate Ethan Salas if they're feeling a little bit desperate. It's a bold prediction. I don't think it's going to happen, but nonetheless, nothing major here. In all honesty, there's nothing here that was surprising. And in general, I don't think there have been any roster decisions that have been surprising thus far, right? We got another update in terms of the Padres roster cuts. They optioned Ryan Berger and reassigned Rodolfo Duran, outfielder Jonathan Peralta, and right-handed pitchers Ed Warniel Nunez, Harold Chirino, and right-handed pitcher Luis Patino. There are now 52 players remaining in Major League Camp. As of that posting, that was on March 9th yesterday. Only thing surprising here, maybe, would just be, I thought Ryan Berger was getting a little bit of love. He was actually on this show, so pulling for him, we love you, man. He might be a guy down the line. I could see something happening because it's also worth noting that we do have 2 bullpen injuries. So that is going to be something to watch over the coming days. And it looks like Berger did not do enough to impress. Maybe the velo just isn't there right now. The stuff isn't carrying as much as he or prospect evaluators, myself, might have thought. But nonetheless, it's not over for him. It's just not the time right now. And then Jonathan Peralta, the only thing that Jonathan Peralta tells me is just like, this is a team that is very much not going full-fledged young. in some ways, and it makes me a little bit nervous because almost every time the Padres do this, in my experience, where they're not giving these like young guys a little bit of a chance, and I'm not saying that Jonathan Peralta is like some super duper star or anything like that. I think he was only projected to play a little bit, but whatever. I just think it's interesting that like they tend to favor some other more established veterans, which I understand. Most teams are going to do that. That being said, a little bit wild that we might be in a situation in which Brandon Lockridge could be the starting day left fielder. But whatever. Or not starting day left fielder, but he could be in the opening day lineup. But more cuts that came along. The last one down to 49 as of yesterday. They re-signed Trenton Brooks, Mike Brousseau, and outfielder and infielder Clay Dungan to minor league camp. 49 players remaining. Got 9 more cuts coming. I don't know what form they're going to take. I think that we could see, though, Johnny Brito potentially be someone that is on the chopping block because we have not heard about him a lot this spring. And also, according to Mike Schilt yesterday, he made a comment saying that he's not going down the starter path and that he may be rather like a bullpen guy. And I think that coming out at this time tells me that they're going to start working on him a little bit more in the minors. And I've been feeling about this way about Johnny Brito and Randy Vasquez, that they're just depth options. I don't think these guys are secretly like studs that they fleeced from the Yankees, but I am a little bit surprised that they're like, all right, yeah, we're not doing starting with Johnny Brito. Maybe he's a high value reliever at some point in his career. Surprised me only a little bit because that's kind of what I thought Randy Vasquez would be. I thought Randy Vasquez is better suited as a reliever, but he is still, according to what we've seen so far, still up for running in that 5th spot. We'll see what happens there, but alas, it doesn't appear that Mr. Brito will be one of the candidates, and I get it. It's fine. It's totally fine, guys. Everything is fine. This 5th starter thing is going to be news of the past because I really do think that the pitching competition for the Padres that we've had this offseason, it was only going to be really crazy, and I was going to hone in a lot more if they had not signed Nick Pivetta. I just think that the Nick Pivetta signing made things a lot less stress-free and, a lot more stress-free, my apologies, than I think I was feeling about the team heading into it. We still don't know other minor things like who's going to be the opening day starter. We still do not know that. They have yet to name that. Schilt said, hey, it's nice to know that we have a bunch of different guys that could have the spy. Basically a nothing answer kind of. Yu Darvish would be one of the more, prestigious selections if they go that way, only in the sense that he probably is going to be one of the rare Padres that gets the nod more than once. And I feel like that doesn't happen very often, and it hasn't happened all that often in the last decade or so. I mean, I still remember when Chris Paddock and Eric Lauer were opening day starters, right? They don't usually have that. They haven't had they haven't been ultra consistent. Now, part of that is injuries, right? I think Joe Musgrove is a guy that they would be like, he's kind of our guy. He's a little bit of he's got that lifelong Padre vibe to him, even though he hasn't been with the Padres for his whole career. So I could see that, but whatever. We'll see what happens. I wouldn't mind Darvish, but putting him out there at first, I think it doesn't make sense at this age for him to be the guy, even though for ceremonial reasons and for vibes reasons, it is a fun pick. But I probably think it's Cease or King. Nothing surprising there, but felt I should say something anyway. And speaking of saying something anyway, folks, we're going to talk about some more updates, including some game action that occurred over the weekend, just a couple highlights and whether or not they are going to impact the race for those last 9 spots on the roster, folks. But first, just need to talk to you for a second about one of our sponsors. And that sponsor today is one that you haven't heard of in a long time, guys. And that is our friends over at the greatest house of all. It's the one that helps you get the supplies you need from the Skilled Trades Supply House, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400,000 plus top brands. Not 400,000. Top brands. My apologies, everybody. 400 plus top brands. You'll find that would be nuts, right? That would be nuts. That would be a real supply house type of thing right there. But you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, do not worry. Supply House offers support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. No robocall or anything like that. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Now, ladies and gentlemen, join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. Check that out. They got all sort of nice things for you. Supplyhouse.com/TM. Check out that Trade Master program and SH5 for 5% discount off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com, everybody. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and most certainly vibing on Section 2. Section 2. Section 2. Segment 2 of Locked On Padres podcast, your first listen every day, free and available on all platforms, including the old YouTube. And eagle-eyed viewers, if you're watching on the YouTube, you might have noticed that I played the outro of this podcast by accident instead of the ad transition because I am a silly goose. But speaking of silly gooses, my boy Matt Waldron got absolutely shelled this weekend, and I gotta mention it. 1 2/3 innings, 6 earned runs on 4 hits, also a wild pitch in there. Look, I'm going to maintain my belief. My belief is, and let me just be very clear, I do not think Matt Waldron is the answer. I have not seen any proof that this guy is a guy that in 3 years we're gonna see him get paid, get a $20 million a year type of contract like a Severino or anything like that. I have not seen anything like that just yet. But what I do believe I've seen is that he can be very good in stretches. He was a 1.8 FWAR pitcher last year because he was pretty good, and his peripheral suggested that he did get a little bit unlucky. That being said, he is a guy that can blow up, and I think that that's what is always going to be the fear with him, which is why I am thinking that this might have been a start that does put him a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of competition for that 5th spot. Because, now don't get me wrong, he's been upping his usage, he's been going all over the place. He's had a pretty good spring. But it is worth noting that he does tend to blow up. Last year, he had an 8-game stretch where he had a 1.95 ERA. And in that stretch, he had 6 straight outings of 6+ innings and 2 or less earned runs allowed. Like, he was balling. And then after that 8-game stretch, he gave up 46 earned runs in 57 innings. The Padres are probably approaching this like, is this a guy that we know can just be okay? Like, I would rather just we know you are a low 4s guy instead of, wow, you might be awesome at points, but you're also a type of player that might come in and just get absolutely bazooka blitzed out of the game, and that might hurt our bullpen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's the problem with Waldron is we've seen the upside, which is one of the reasons I thought that he had the inside track on the 5th spot. And he still could, by the way. But we've also seen the downside, right? We haven't seen the same level of downside for some of the other candidates. From Randy Vasquez to Stephen Kolek to Kyle Hart, all those guys. We haven't necessarily seen that. So I think that Waldron, he's not out, but I do think a start like that is a reminder, a stark reminder that I'm not saying he's a superstar, but I still think he can be solid, but it is also fair to point out that that was not a good showing for him. And according to The Athletic, Mr. Stephen Kolek looked good in a simulated game. We talked about Kolek before. They were obsessed with him last year, at times for the wrong reason. I didn't think he looked all that great, but he's kind of a change of pace guy in the sense that they could bring him in and say, you know what? You generate way too many ground balls for us to be leaving you off of this rotation. Right? There's very few players that produced a greater ground ball rate than Stephen Kolek. In fact, the only one that did was Pedro Avila, and it was only in 8 innings. The next closest guy was Wandy Peralta, and we know that Wandy Peralta isn't very good, right? Wandy Peralta somehow had an ERA of 3.99 and a FIP of 5.46. Like, Wandy is like very much like, I don't know what they were thinking, and it's clear that they didn't know what they were thinking either. We kind of trusted Preller and company that they knew how to assemble the bullpen, and Wandy was a huge miss. And then after that is like Tanner Scott, Adrian Morejon. So when you're able to produce that ground ball rate, I think that is the sign of why the Padres might like him, to just be a steady force. in that fifth spot. And by the way, if anything happens, they could call up Matt Waldron. They could bring in Randy Vasquez. They can bring in Kyle Hart potentially, right? Whatever it is, I think that Stephen Kolek probably might be one of the guys with the inside track. He's looked pretty good this spring, and according to what I had been reading in The Athletic, he had a good look in spring training. And also, Nick Pivetta, tiny thing, he also looked great. 3 innings, 0 earned runs, 1 hit, 3 Ks. I've been super bullish on him, and bold predictions, I said he would be an all-star this year. I think he's going to be solid. There are vibes of Musgrove here, and I'm not saying in terms of the literal pitches he throws and the literal numbers. I'm saying more from the, wow, this guy's been on the up for a little bit, and quietly on the up for a little bit, and the Padres might have snuck in and got him before everybody realized this guy's super legit. He's become like a super strikeout artist. Yes, he gives up the long ball, but if he can add a sinker, maybe fine-tune some pitches to make it that batters are more trying to go to one direction or the other, maybe to right field instead of left for Petco. Focus on that a little bit more. I think it could be a really good match. I think that this guy could have like a mid-threes ERA and a great strikeout rate, at least at the beginning of the season, which is part of my bold prediction, right? That'll be an all-star. So very excited about Kolek and very excited about Pivetta. And I'm still tepidly optimistic about Mr. Matt Waldron. But folks, that's not all. Some other people that have impressed. Mr. Alek Jacob, 38% K rate in spring training so far. He continues to be very, very impressive, and he was a guy that was very impressive last year. I think he was one of those guys that people, or I might have been one of those people who said, why is Kolek getting the time and not Alek Jacob? Alek Jacob has shown stuff for a while now, and I think that he's a really interesting player to keep an eye on because I think he's got a decent amount of upside, and the Padres, because of the injuries to Brian Hoeing and Sean Reynolds, there's definitely 2 spots up right now for grabs. And last year, 2.45 ERA in the limited frames that he got in 14 2/3 innings, but decent strikeout rate. And more importantly, I think, was the walk rate last year. 33% K rate, which is amazing, and 3.5% walk rate. I think Alek Jacob could be really, really good. And this is one of the reasons I've talked about on this show. I think the Padres bullpen can be low-key really, really, really good in the division this year. The problem is going to be that the D-backs and Dodgers are awesome, but I'm pretty confident, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not against a Robert Suarez trade. Now, I did say that before Hoeing and Sean Reynolds were hurt, but I think it's because the Padres low-key got some savages in their bullpen. So excited to see how that kind of develops. 2 home runs this weekend for Gavin Sheets. Is it enough to salvage his mediocre spring so far? I don't know. I mean, the only thing you can say with Gavin Sheets, who's been a very below average player for a long time now, long time being like 4 years, and he was with the White Sox. That's the thing with the White Sox, right? Like, not even the White Sox were like, we like this guy all that much. But in fairness, it was also the White Sox. And what do we know about them? Horribly run team. They have no idea what they're doing. But for me, I just don't know if the power upside here is worth it. He could definitely hit it a decent amount. Did this save him a tiny bit? Sure. Could he get called up at some point? Sure, because of the power that he has. He's been able to hit for a decent amount of power before, and he actually doesn't strike out too much, which is fun, right? He doesn't. I know that's weird, right? 20.8% strikeout rate in his career, and the Padres do like low strikeout guys. My problem is the defense doesn't add anything there, and if he's not hitting the heck out of the ball, I don't know if they see anything here, but thought it was worth bringing up nonetheless. And then lastly, Mr. Xander Bogaerts, 2 RBI single for him. I just really like that we saw that, I just like that we saw it. I think that Bogaerts is a guy that is starting to receive the ire of Padres fans everywhere. I talked about it on Friday's show, comparing him to Eric Hosmer. Now, while I do not think that he is befitting of that title, I think that is a little bit unfair because he seems like a player's pro. And unlike Eric Hosmer, he has been awesome before. And in that first season, he was a good player. He was just so phenomenally not clutch and not able to drive in runs that it was very odd, to the point where I was like, he might have like an absolute monster season the next year. And then I was right in my thinking of his ability in clutch situations not to hit, that was going to, flip. But it happened with the rest of the team. It did not extend to Xander Bogaerts. So again, I'm just hoping for him, looking at any signs of juice, any signs of optimism. Whether or not he takes over Jose Iglesias, I should say. Whether or not Jose Iglesias takes some time from Xander Bogaerts remains to be seen. I doubt that would happen this season, barring an injury, but I could see a world in which he plays second, right? If Jake Cronenworth is out, depending on the lefty-righty matchup of that day, I could see it. But overall, just happy for Xander. Just every time he does anything. This guy has no reason to receive my ire. Because in fairness, this was a crazy overpay. You know what I mean? Like, when this contract happened, I think everyone was like, I mean, good player, but don't you guys have Jackson Merrill and Ha-Seong Kim? Like, this is a little bit weird right now. So, again, that's Preller for you every now and then. But nonetheless, very excited to see how he does this year. He is one of, I think it's fair to say that he is the big X factor this year. Like, X is the X factor. I really do, because if he can be a 4-win player, that helps you a lot. Like, it really does. It just gives you a guy that, you know, can go up there and be a decently productive player and play some good defense. I think it matters. You just really want to be a solid player right now, because the Padres can't really afford him to be a disaster for 9 more years. It's really, really scary, the Xander Bogaerts thing. Like, really, really scary. And if it turns out this guy is cooked, like completely fried, the wrist is like hanging on by a thread, like that one video of the chicken breast thing, then the Padres are going to be in a lot of trouble for a long time. But not to be all doomerism and whatnot, but what can I say? Sometimes I am on this show, and sometimes on this show we have to read from our sponsors, which is what we're going to do right now. That's right, folks. Let me tell you about the good folks that you've heard of plenty of times. That is our friends over at FanDuel, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you about FanDuel, because March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets at the end of the damn thing, man. So go check it out, guys. Easy and fast. The FanDuel app is great and simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are thriving. We are thriving in this last segment of today's episode. Not the last episode. Don't worry. Don't worry. I am not the last Jedi, folks. Let me tell you. But overall, let's continue talking about the Padres spring training updates. We already just talked about our guy, Xander Bogaerts. Tirso Ornelas continues to impress for the team. Reading from The Athletic, they had a kind of article that detailed like which players are turning heads for every team. They did one for every team. And for the Padres, they wrote, the Padres lost all-star left fielder Jerickson Profar to the Braves in free agency, creating competition for the position between veterans Jason Hayward, Connor Joe, Oscar Gonzalez, and Tirso Ornelas. Although Ornelas might not win the starting job, he has played well enough so far to deserve consideration. He hit .421 with a .522 on-base percentage in his first 19 at-bats, and last year at AAA, he slashed .297, .367, .497 with 24 doubles, 23 home runs, and 89 RBIs. He's a real sleeper in Padres camp, and AJ Preller said people forget that Tirso is just 24 years old because he signed at 16. He has gotten better year after year. He has always hit. He's a guy that puts the bat on the ball, and he's able to drive the baseball. In addition, he walks and doesn't strike out. We value his contact rate. It's interesting that that's brought up, because what Dennis Lin of The Athletic wrote, to now parlay this into what we're going to talk about a lot in this segment, is that one of his roster predictions is he had a lot of predictions, and he was basically saying that Brandon Lockridge, he thinks, is going to make the team over Tirso Ornelas as of right now, right? He had Tyler Wade making it over Eggy Rosario. He had Martin Maldonado making it over Luis Campizano. And that's wild for a bunch of different reasons. Let's focus on Tirso really quickly, though, because he's been great. And as the I just read, like, he's only 24 years old, and he's the Padres' number 11th ranked prospect. But as Dennis Lin writes, the Padres will want to limit Joe's exposure, referring to Connor Joe, to right-handers. But Hayward, still a solid defender, hasn't eased concerns about his offense. And then Ornelas, he's produced in the Cactus League, but he's yet to be tested in the majors. Lockridge provides the kind of bench profile, above average base running and defense that Ornelas does not. And for me, I'm just like, what? What are we doing here? Brandon Lockridge for sure. Now, granted, Brandon Lockridge isn't like a totally proven guy. That's why this one doesn't actually upset me nearly as much as the Tyler Wade prediction over Eggy Rosario and the Martin Maldonado prediction, which we'll get to in a second. But I don't know. I'm just not going to value the base running nearly as much because to me, while he's certainly done that before, the guy, I just don't see it. Now, here's the thing. We have time, right? But I just don't understand how Tirso Ornelas is putting up those numbers in AAA, and he's been hitting for so long. He's been in the system for like 8 years, and why he's not getting the treatment potentially making the team over a guy that we're like, is that really going to be a left fielder you feel confident about? I think there's a world in which Tirso Ornelas, like a month and a half into the season, we're like, yeah, that's just probably going to be our left fielder for 70% of the time. Right? 60% of the time, maybe. Because to me, I think Connor Joe, he's not very good, all that great defensively. He's not, this isn't Nick Castellanos or anything like that, or Kyle Schwarber, but he's not much of a plus there, and I don't think the bat can keep as much. He looked okay at times in Colorado, but I don't see it. And then Jason Hayward, it's like, okay, there's this platoon going on, where Connor Joe, I guess you could slot him in at first base every now if you had to. But there's this platoon of meh bat, that we're going to have out there because he's a better bat, and then Jason Hayward, which is an atrocious bat, but at least he could play defense. I don't know. I just really, is Tirso just a disaster in the outfield? That's what I'm wondering. Is he just a really disastrous defensive player? Because to me, I'm hearing Preller praise him. I'm hearing Schilt be excited about him. He's in 400 in the spring. I don't know what else you need to do, right? And I get it. I get that there's stability with your Connor Joes and Jason Hayward, but it's just a little bit puzzling for me. And those other guys, those are the ones that upset me more. Tyler Wade and over Eggy Rosario. I do not understand the Padres' obsession with this guy. Now, granted, remember, this isn't final. This is just what Dennis Lin said based on what he knows, and he's really tapped into the Padres. So I'm assuming that for right now, I can go off of this and just say they might be thinking of him over our guy Eggy Rosario. And to me, my thing is Eggy Rosario punishes the right pitcher. Specifically, he punishes lefties. So at least I understand if Eggy Rosario might not be a full-time player because the platoon splits on him aren't great. Now, I don't think they're going to be as absurd as they were in limited time last year, right? Like that, because that would be like just one of the most obscene career splits I've ever seen. 182 WRC plus against lefties, a 23 against righties. But to me, he was amazing, though, against lefties. So don't you want to have that as a bench bat? A bench bat that you know is going to go out there and produce, at least against lefties. And also, by the way, he's flashed the leather sometimes. He's been pretty good there. Tyler Wade is a player that for years now has been almost a negative. He was negative 0.3 last year in terms of wins over replacement. He was negative 0.6 2 years ago with the Angels. He doesn't hit all that well, 56 WRC plus. The only thing he has is speed. And I understand the desire for speed. But to me, I want to hit some damn home runs, man. I want to have that potential power there. And I just do not think the speed matters nearly as much as these other things, right? And I think that Eggy Rosario can play a confident second base if need be on Jake Cronenworth's days off, right? With the lefty split. It just makes so much more sense to have Eggy Rosario than Tyler Wade. It's just teed up for them. And you're going with Tyler Wade? He didn't do anything last year. I was upset last year because they wouldn't let Graham Pauley hit. And I'm not saying Graham Pauley's a star, but I didn't understand why you're calling this guy up so Tyler Wade can play. I just don't see why Tyler Wade is the player that you're like, give it some time. If it's Jose Iglesias, and let's pretend Jose Iglesias comes in, he's playing second, he's got a 70 WRC plus for 2 weeks, right? I'd be like, okay. But we've literally seen him be a productive hitter before, and it was not only just last year, but recently. He's been a productive hitter before. Tyler Wade has never had that, so I don't understand why you're blocking Eggy Rosario with a player like this. And again, Jake Cronenworth, that's the other thing here. Jake Cronenworth doesn't do as well against lefties. He's not a disastrous splits guy, career 90 WRC plus against lefties, 115 against righties. But if you do want to give him that day, I want to put in the guy that so far has shown that he matches lefties, and he can play a good defensive backstop too. I've seen him mostly play third, but I think he could do that. So I don't understand that one. And lastly is Martin Maldonado, who is, I don't understand this. I don't understand it. Now, here's the thing. I think this is the second most absurd, right? I think the most absurd is probably the, what's it called? I think the most absurd out of all of these is probably the Tyler Wade one over Eggy Rosario. With Martin Maldonado, this was a negative 1.5 win player last year, negative 0.8 the year before. He is going to be 38 years old. He has looked bad in spring training. And also, his defensive numbers are not good. He's minus outs above average in framing, minus in blocking, minus in caught stealing, throwing out runners, all that. And all that I see when they talk about Martin Maldonado, the thing about him, the thing about this man is he's got baseball IQ, at least according to Mike Schilt. In quotes, I'm going to be pleasantly surprised but stunned if I come across anybody with the intellect, game management, game acumen of Yadier Molina, Schilt said. That being said, it's the closest conversation I've been able to have with a catcher watching the game. He's a very advanced, high baseball IQ guy. I mean, look, he's won a World Series as well. Yadi's on his own planet, but Maldi's in that galaxy. And first of all, no, he's not in that galaxy. Martin Maldonado has never been nearly as good as Yadier Molina was, right? But he had a stretch where he was a useful player, especially early on in Milwaukee. He had a decent stretch there. He had a decent stretch in Houston. I get it. I don't mind the idea of bringing him on board, but he's been a negative player for a while, and he's negative defensively. So there's one of two things happening here. Once again, the Padres hate Luis Campusano with all their heart, and they refuse to give the kid a chance. Or number two, that the Luis Campusano situation is really bad, and that they just do not have any faith in him being not an just outrageously negative player behind the dish. Because the hitting went away last year. And if he can't field, then what are you? Right? So maybe that's why they want to go this route. It's very concerning, but I will say if Maldonado were to make the team over Campusano, that would be a pretty big indictment on Campusano because we've now seen you've had a lot of time to get the defense down and you haven't improved in that regard, and the bat isn't worth it. We're not going to go for a guy who's got an 80 WRC plus and can't field, right? And frankly, he was even worse than that when he was batting, right? He just wasn't in it for power, wasn't drawing walks, was swinging at everything. He looked like a mess last year, which is a shame because he was good in 2023. So I'm really worried about this. I'm worried about all three of these developments. The Eggy Rosario one being number one. I'm hoping that's not true because I will actually be upset on this podcast. Like, what are we waiting for? And Tirso is pretty frustrating because he's done nothing but hit well. And we're like, all right, Brandon Lockridge, you get the spot for some reason. This poor kid's been here since he's 16, right? Like, I'm waiting for him to get a chance. And I just will not be surprised if they're like, all right, we started Lockridge for a little bit. We tried the Hayward, Connor Joe experiment. Tirso came in and just kept flashing, kept getting hits, seeing a decent amount of pitches, going up there and playing well. And unless he's a disaster defensively, I don't see why you don't give him a chance. At least a little bit. But then again, who am I to judge? Because I am an idiot after all. Last thing, still waiting on Kyle Hart, making his like more of an impression. I think he could be a guy that makes the bullpen. I think he could be a bullpen guy. Do not be surprised if by the end of when roster cuts are down that it's Kyle Hart and it is our guy Alek Jacob as the last two players in that bullpen. I would not be surprised. I could see them filling in. I really could. Because I think both of them are really good. Number one, I think that Alek Jacob is really good. And number two, why would the Padres pay Kyle Hart that money, right? So instead, he could be, maybe he's a Nick Martinez type, where they might stretch him out as a starter every now and then, if the need arises. But for now, we're like, all right, we're paying you to kind of be a major leaguer, so you're going to go out there and just be really good as a bullpen guy. I could see it. But, folks, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Looking forward to tomorrow's episode and future episodes talking about all things Padres. Maybe doing a Padres bullpen breakdown history here on this show, which I think will just be a lot of fun going down memory lane past 5 years. And then, of course, we've got Miller coming on later this week. It's going to be a lot of fun, guys. So stay tuned. Until that next time, though, stay safe. And, of course, stay faithful, my Friar Faithful homies. Take care.